So the story goes from bad to worse for Keir Starmer and his government, and rather than actually kind of making the story go away, he's simply poured more petrol on the fire. Let's talk to Peter Hitchens from the Mail on Sunday and find out what he makes of it all. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
The story takes twists and turns every single day. I mean, I'm less concerned about the dresses and the free tickets than I am now about Lord Ali and his little trips to the Middle East. What's all that about?
Well, I think the problem is once you've done something, as this government, this Prime Minister had done, you can't undo it by saying, well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm giving all this stuff back. It doesn't mean you make the mistake in the first place of accepting. And there's this element of desperation about this. They're obviously very, very deeply worried about the damage that this has done to them in their early weeks in office, and I think they're right to be.
Yeah.
They are, I won't say they're dead in the water or anything like that. It's still obviously a functioning government and will continue to function for some time to come with a large majority, unchallenged by any serious opposition. But they have lost an enormous amount of the important political momentum which a government has in its first 18 months, during which it can do most of the damage which it wishes to do. I call it damage because most governments do make things worse rather than better. And as I say, the giving it back is, first of all, it's a total admission that it was wrong to take it. Secondly, it doesn't undo the problem at all, any more, I'm afraid, than the Chancellor of the Exchequer's hair colour will make anyone any keener on the budget, which he's planning to drop on our heads on October the 30th.
Yes, exactly right. Let's have it from the mouth of the man himself, Keir Starmer. This is why he says he's paying back 6,000 quid.
Look, we came in as a government of change. We are now going to bring forward principles for donations because until now politicians have used their best individual judgment on a case-by-case basis. I think we need some principles of general application. So I took the decision that until the principles are in place, it was right for me to make those repayments.
He's not very good with words, is he? I mean, for a lawyer, he's absolutely useless. I mean, he's basically admitting that they didn't have any principles until now, and now they're going to have some more principles, which are not going to make any difference.
It is extraordinary. For years now, with standards commissioners and all the rest of it, Parliament has been trying to sort out the exact rules under which people should operate. But it doesn't. You don't need rules, do you? It seems to me to know that accepting luxurious gifts from rich friends is going to look bad if it comes out. I just think they were just surprised that it came out.
Yeah. And
this is always the grave mistake which people make. It always does come out. But again, there's no sign here, certainly around the Prime Minister and his more prominent cabinet members, of any, as it were, touch. They don't seem to have that magic touch which the successful politician has. I just can't remember a government, apart perhaps from John Major, which was so completely bereft of the most basic appearance of knowing what they were doing or having some sort of plan. Now, this contrasts, of course, with the fact that the Labour project, as embodied by Sir Keir Starmer, remains an extremely dogmatic and high-powered project which intends to change the country, in my view, for the worse over the next few years in deep and potent ways. But that you can't just do that without having the fundamental ability to persuade the country that you ought to be leading it. I just, as I say, have never seen anything like this. If we had, as we do not have, an opposition, it would be much, much worse for them. As we don't, I suspect that although this won't be forgotten, it will fade in importance over the next few months and will cease to matter as much.
It's interesting you say that. I think it may do. However, as I say, I think, like every scandal that emerges on the political front, it depends where it goes. And my focus now is kind of more on Lord Ali and his role in whatever it was he was doing in Syria and whatever it was he was doing in Iraq. Because, you know, I don't remember that being reported at the time. I don't remember anybody saying, oh, aren't we fortunate to have this incredibly generous man who loves giving money to the Labour Party and who's very willing to go and give some of his time to help out these countries in the Middle East who are suffering under the yoke of whatever it is that they're suffering under. What was he doing?
Well, we don't know. I'll wait to find out more about that. It's possible. Governments do use people who are not actually part of the government for what they call good offices, to try and smooth over problems which it would be much harder for ministers to do, and to do it in the background. I've got no objection to that in principle. Sometimes it works.
Well, I have.
I just haven't.
You might remember a story of a guy called Tom Barak who went to work in the Middle East for Donald Trump, and he was kind of an unofficial envoy to the United States. He ended up being charged and prosecuted by the FBI because he hadn't been properly vetted and put through Congress as anybody who's supposed to be an envoy for the country should be. And I think if Lord Ali's going to be going around representing Britain, surely he should be in some way vetted and in some way approved by at least Parliament.
Well, that depends what he's doing. If he's actually taking decisions and deploying the power of government and spending taxpayers' money, then obviously he has to be responsible to Parliament. But there, as I say, there are backdoor means of making, particularly.
But that's what I mean. We don't know, do we?
Countries. I mean, you mentioned Syria, and countries like Syria, it's a dreadful secret police tyranny and torture state. On the other hand, it's sometimes important to have back channels there, which you couldn't use a minister to do. And there were times in the Blair era when President Assad was invited to stay at Buckingham Palace, if you remember, or at least to visit, I think, for tea and sandwiches.
Yes.
And so that time is plainly gone, but that doesn't mean that you can't use a back channel if he was willing to do it, and if he did it responsibly. I'm not going to criticise it simply because he did it. I don't know what happened. I'm prepared to wait to see what actually did take place. If he was incompetent and made a mess of it, then it's a different matter. Otherwise, I just accept that politicians do sometimes use non-politicians for back channel talks, and I'm not in principle against it.
It just makes me feel slightly uneasy, because effectively what he's doing is he's buying his way into a very powerful position, and I just don't think that sounds healthy.
It could be. I'm much more disturbed by the Downing Street pass, which he...
Well, that's another part of it, isn't it?
The suggestions that he was able to... I'm not entirely sure whether this is completely settled yet, the suggestions he was able to run a reception at Downing Street. That kind of thing is quite wrong.
Yeah. But that's the problem, isn't it? They've been so secretive about everything. Everything has had to be dragged out of them. You know, even at the weekend, we found out that, Keir Starmer had put down £16,000 worth of office costs that he'd been contributed to, which it turned out to be another £16,000 worth of clothes. You know. Well,
that is true. But, of course, the other thing is the way in which when registers of interest are compiled, the way in which you declare stuff can be very vague. And this was the foundation of the problem. That it was possible to declare these things in such a vague fashion. Yeah. People found out what they really were. There was an outcry, but before then, no one was really paying much attention. And my own view is that donations by anybody to politicians should be limited to very small amounts, so that really multimillionaires shouldn't be able to have much more influence than, say, a person who could give 150 quid. But that would be quite a radical change. But I think that that is the reform which would really rule this sort of thing. Yeah. There is something wrong with just because he's very rich, somebody shouldn't be able to have as much influence as Lord Ali has. I mean, if you want to have influence, there are many ways of obtaining it. One of them is proving that you can be useful and helpful to the country, but paying for it by donation just...
but that's what I mean. That's why I'd rather see...
Most people think it's wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do think, as I say, access to Downing Street, which is purely, it seems to be a benefit to Lord Ali, is different from him doing some act which may have been a public service. So I'll wait to find out more about it before getting exercised about it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, the story's not going to go away anytime soon anyway. It's rumbling on. Let's talk about civil servants, because we've got a story today about the workers at the Office for National Statistics who apparently have backed an all-out strike because they're protesting against being ordered back to the workplace, wait for it, 2 days a week.
It is astounding. Well, it's not just, of course, the civil service. I think the civil service may be the worst instance of this. Large numbers of businesses are still struggling with the enormous amount of working from home that's going on. And it's a lasting legacy of the COVID panic, which you and I spent so much time discussing when it was going on. And one of the many catastrophes we had over 150 years since the Industrial Revolution obtained a level of work discipline in this country which made it possible for us to function as an efficient modern country. And that is now rapidly fading away, and working from home is an issue. It is very difficult for employers now to compel people to come into work. But I think a lot of private companies. I was talking to a businessman the other day who said that in his company people were beginning to understand that if they didn't come to the idea of going back to work as they had previously done, the business would suffer, and eventually most of them would lose their jobs. And that, of course, doesn't apply in the civil service. But I think that as much public pressure as can be should be applied to people in those circumstances, just to say to them, look, you cannot accept, as you do, the very secure conditions that people are given in public service, and not accept a very high level of duty and responsibility in return. And the unions should have actually much more sense than to try and fight against the reintroduction of working from the office. Anybody who deals with any public department knows that the fact that many people are still working from home means they get an inferior service. It takes longer to reach people. When you do reach them, they can be distracted by the fact that they're working from home. The whole atmosphere of offices is partly kept going by the fact that people are seeing other people working, that they're keeping up informal contacts with colleagues, which enable decisions to be taken faster and actions to be done faster. Obviously, we have to get people back into the office. And I think I am, as you know, more sympathetic to the trade unions than many people. But for them to make a fight out of this is ridiculous and actually wrong, and will damage, ultimately, the civil service and the country if they stick with it.
But we may well see a lot of this, though, because, of course, given that there's all kinds of money in the bank for public sector workers, they'll probably be telling themselves, well, don't worry, we'll go on strike because this government will settle it no matter what, no matter whether it's 10%, 15% or 20%, we'll get it.
Well, maybe so, but even quite left-wing governments eventually confronted with this sort of thing have to stand up to it from time to time. But the ultimate problem is a moral problem, as so many of these things are. Do you really want, at your expense, the government of the country and the needs of the public to suffer? And if you do want to do that, then you can't really expect it to go on forever. Ultimately, I mean, an awful lot of the great strikes and industrial struggle of the 70s and 80s was an intransigence by people unwilling to accept a necessary change. And in many cases, they won an immediate victory, but lost the long-term war, and the industries in which they worked have ceased to exist. And that was at least partly because of an unwillingness to accept more flexible working conditions, for instance, which would have saved their industries. I think particularly of the Fleet Street, the print unions, is the most striking example of that. There was a deal on offer which would have enabled most of them to keep their jobs and carry on working where they were. They would not take it, and as a result, they just no longer exist. It's all gone. And you simply can't hold up the weather by protesting against changes which are bound to happen. And I don't think you can really prevent, if you want this to be an efficient functioning country, you can really prevent the growing and important move to get people to come back to work and stop working from home. If you try to do so, you will suffer in the end in some other way.
Absolutely right. Peter, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens there from the Mail on Sunday. Let's get a